Yep. So for today, I posted a reading, um, uh, and on the topic of Buddhist-Christian dialogue. So this really continues off of the presentation on Tuesday. Again, here are some of the themes that we've been covering in this class. And then I said, there's actually kind of another theme, which is modern interreligious dialogue emerging from the encounter between Christianity and religions of Asia. So one, kind of the birth of interreligious dialogue was the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893, and then 100-year anniversary in 1993, and then now somewhat ongoing every few years, another Parliament of the World's Religions, most recent one in Chicago, 2023. And my reflection on attending that Parliament of the World's Religions, the first paragraph of my reflection is to give a description of when I first heard about the Parliaments of the World's Religions. I mean, I'm actually originally from Illinois, and 1993, I guess my family we had just moved to another state. Anyway, I don't remember hearing anything about this when it was happening, but after I came into the monastery in 2001, I was interested in a book called The Gethsemane Encounter. And the Gethsemane Encounter, that book described what happened in 1993 at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. That's the 100-year anniversary. The Dalai Lama spoke with some Benedictine monks who were all attending the Parliament of the World's Religions. And the Dalai Lama mentioned that that Buddhists and Benedictines should try to hold gatherings for dialogue in the future. And that led to another series of gatherings, specifically between Buddhists and Benedictines, the Gethsemane encounters. And so that was the reading that I actually posted for today, and that gave some background of that, including mention of the Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate is a document, the Second Vatican Council. In the Catholic Church, there have been councils throughout the history of Catholicism. Some would say there is a council. The first council may have been a council in Jerusalem of the 12 apostles being the original bishops of Christianity. But other than that, you jump to the 4th century, and that is a time where Christianity goes through a transition within the Roman Empire, that the Emperor Constantine decrees that Christianity is legalized in the Roman Empire. And so from that point on, they continue to have these councils, meaning bishops from around the world will come to a particular place. It's not always the Vatican, but it has been the Vatican. And the bishops will meet in a council, and they will discuss particular issues in the Catholic Church. Some of the councils that were held in the 4th and 5th centuries were some of the councils that really defined Catholic belief and Catholic theology. Catholics, and I think some other Christians are familiar with a prayer called the Nicene Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, et cetera, et cetera. That comes from the Council of Nicaea, like 325, I think is that was. So anyway, the councils. Now, fast forward to the 20th century, the Second Vatican Council is a time Pope John the 23rd calls the Second Vatican Council. The First Vatican Council happened in the 19th century, aka the 1800s. The Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965. When I say bishops coming together to discuss these issues, what happens is 4 different sessions. 1962 in the fall, bishops come from all over the world to the Vatican for a session of a few months. They go back and come again in the fall of 1963, go back, come back in the fall of 1964, go back, come back in the fall of 1965. Now, the end result of these councils is ultimately a bunch of documents. And the documents are basically, here is what we've decided about certain issues in the Catholic Church. One of the things about the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965 was the world had modernized in a lot of different ways. So the Catholic Church was in a position, we got to kind of figure out how to deal with some of the things happening with modernization of the world. One of the documents was Nostra Aetate, the relationship of the church to non-Christian religions. It's actually maybe one of the first statements of the Catholic Church about non-Christian religions. I guess maybe another way of phrasing it is, as far as the relation of the Catholic Church to non-Christian religions, it's the statement that opens up greater consideration for the reality that the Catholic Church is not going to immediately convert all the people of all the religions that they are encountering, and maybe that's not the best approach in the first place to go in. So there's certainly the history of conversion and missions, and so Nostra Aetate is one of the first that kind of speaks about the idea of dialogue. Here's a timeline again showing the Second Vatican Council. And what I mentioned as one of our themes being that modern interreligious dialogue emerges from the encounter of Christianity with religions of Asia. I guess the other thing that I could point out, and I was thinking, well, it's probably more so coming from the encounter of Christianity with religions of Asia, more so than encounter of Christianity with religions of Africa, religions of the Americas. Now, the one other religion here that I guess I didn't really include in that is that modern interreligious dialogue also emerges in the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Judaism being the religion that Christianity emerges from. And if we look at this period of history, we can put into here before 1962, going back a couple decades before that, we are familiar with the major event of World War II happening in the 1940s, ending in 1945. And of course, tragically, one of the events of World War II was the Holocaust, the Shoah, the extermination of European Jews by Nazi Germany. So that actually is another major event um, uh, from which modern interreligious dialogue emerges, where Christians rethink the fact that Christianity had for centuries tried to convert people to Christianity. All of this coming from the Christian mentality of being the ultimate religion. And sometimes in ways that are also not as noble. Potentially, there is the idea convert people from other religions for their salvation. Well, the other flip side of the mentality of having the ultimate religion is derogatory attitudes towards other religions. And so Christianity looks back on a history of derogatory attitudes towards Judaism. And sometimes not just derogatory attitudes, but violence towards Jews in minorities. And rethinking the degree to which some of this played into the kind of environment, you could say directly or indirectly, the environment from which the Holocaust becomes a reality. So it is another one of the reasons for Catholicism to rethink the approach, the mentality towards other religions. Here, I mean, the number of actual bishops at the Second Vatican Council was very large. These are bishops from around the world, not exclusively cardinals. Soon in the next couple of weeks, you will probably hear some things about in the news about cardinals going to Rome and the Vatican, and specifically to meet in the Sistine Chapel to elect a new pope. But there are cardinals are selected from among the bishops and archbishops. So bishops and archbishops are a larger group than cardinals. There might be some cardinals who are not bishops, or I don't know the specific details about all of those things. All right, Nostra Aetate. And so some of the things mentioned in Nostra Aetate, that the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these other religions. This is kind of following up on mentioning a few. Nostra Aetate mentions Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Maybe indigenous religions. I forget if there is a mention of indigenous religions. The Catholic Church regards with sincere reverence those ways of conduct and of life, precepts and teachings which, though differing in many aspects from the ones she holds and sets forth, nonetheless often reflect a ray of truth which enlightens all people. That phrase right there, ray of truth, has caught some attention as, okay, the Catholic Church is acknowledging a ray of truth in other religions. and then that is also to be honored. If we go back to maybe it was last week, I presented on theologies of religion. One of the theologies of religion, if we take the categories by Paul Knitter, one approach is replacement. The idea that Christianity is the ultimate religion and other religions are negative in certain ways. They can be described as superstitious, idolatrous, and Christianity needs to replace those. Is now so the idea of the way of the rays of truth is to kind of a bit more, not a great on the spectrum, not all the way on the other side, but a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more open-minded than that approach. From the time of the Second Vatican Council to the present, kind of the end result is ultimately kind of mixed messages from the Catholic Church. It's like, yes, Catholics should be in dialogue with other religions. Wait a minute, make sure that you proclaim that Jesus is the Savior for all humanity. Stay in dialogue with other religions. Try to convert people. Wait a minute, like what are we? So it ultimately can be a little bit confusing there as far as, well, so even in Nostra Aetate, it's like it still goes back to Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So that is kind of how this has kind of turned out. It's like, okay, here is a document about dialogue. Well, then it also kind of tones that down, and then some subsequent documents kind of go back and forth. So that's kind of how it is. But right, there's some mention of Hinduism, inexhaustible abundance of myths, philosophical inquiry, seeking freedom from the anguish of our human condition, and so forth. Mention of Buddhism in various forms, realizes the radical insufficiency of this changeable world. So just kind of pointing out some of the positive aspects of other religions. And here's another good point here, 1964, and then 1974, actually, one of the cardinals of the Vatican wrote to a Benedictine abbot primate, is kind of the name for the kind of head of the Benedictines internationally, Rembert Weekland. And so I found this quite interesting that it came from the Vatican to call on Benedictines to pursue and to be a bridge and contact point for understanding between Christians and people of other faith. So that is really kind of what started this kind of effort of Benedictine dialogue with Buddhism. Even before that, probably, okay, I did mention some of the Benedictines that went to India. Henri de La Salle, who took the name Abhishektananda. Bede Griffiths, I forget the name that he took, but some of these Benedictines in India. Well, here is one of the Benedictines in the United States, Thomas Merton, actually born in Europe and came to the United States spent some time in New York City, studied at Columbia, converted to Catholicism while he was in New York. His conversion came to some degree from being studying for a degree in medieval literature and reading some medieval literature that led him on a journey to become Catholic. And so he came into the Catholic Church while he was in New York. And from there, he started to think about some kind of religious life and traveled a little bit around the United States until he decided to become a monk at Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky. And he ended up, here is a picture of Thomas Merton. He is a Cistercian Trappist, and that's a branch of the Benedictines. We could talk about ways that they are different from the Benedictine order that I'm a part of, but ultimately we can say that they also follow the rule of Saint Benedict. They interpret some things differently. Generally speaking, they interpret some things more strictly. So we can kind of go with that. He became a Trappist monk in Kentucky. And he also was an excellent writer. And he wrote books that sold millions of copies. He did not necessarily write strictly academically. He wasn't really just publishing in peer-reviewed journals that would be presentations in front of other scholars. I think he has now caught the interest of a lot of scholars, but ultimately he was publishing books that were selling millions, that were meant for anyone to read. And people found his writing style easy to read as well. He went on a trip to Asia in 1968 and was able to visit a number of different Buddhist sites. And he met the Dalai Lama when he was in Asia. There you can see, 1968, quite a younger Dalai Lama. Maybe in his 20s. The Dalai Lama mentioned to Thomas Merton that, or mentioned kind of publicly that he thought that Thomas Merton had a very strong understanding of Buddhism. So quite a compliment. And so in a way, I can kind of point back to this relationship between Thomas Merton and the Dalai Lama as, okay, then in 1993, the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, the Dalai Lama talks to the other Benedictines about these gatherings. And so it's like, okay, that comes in part from that meeting between the Dalai Lama and Thomas Merton. It's unfortunate. We can imagine what could have happened. Thomas Merton on this trip to Asia, he was in Thailand. I think that might have been his final stop. And tragically, kind of a strange way to kind of end his story is that he was taking a shower. There was a metal floor fan, like that was a standing fan that he wanted to move, and maybe he was standing in water. He was electrocuted. So just kind of, yeah, strange that he and then tragic to think of, like, if he would have lived, how much he could have accomplished, but this was, I think this may be some of the photos one of the photos that he took visiting giant Buddha statues in Sri Lanka that had a great impact on him. I think this may be one of his photos. And so shortly thereafter is the founding of an organization, Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. And then the Gethsemane encounters in Kentucky and so forth. More to be said about all of that. And I'm just going to kind of move forward. Yep, the Gethsemane encounters. There was that Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1993, and then a few years later, 1996, is a Gethsemane encounter, and the Dalai Lama comes to Thomas Merton's home monastery, Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky, and visits Thomas Merton's grave. And so there has been this history of monastic interreligious dialogue from that point forward. Let's see. Right now, I think the materials, the online presence of that organization is at BuddhistCatholic.org. Here is a book from one of the Gethsemane encounters on the topic of ecology, Buddhist and Christian. And sometime in the 2000s, I became a board member of Monastic and Religious Dialogue. And then I was able to attend some of the gatherings of Benedictines and Buddhists. I have not been to a Gethsemane encounter, but this was actually held at a Buddhist monastery and school, kind of a whole complex in California, Sonoma County, I think it is. And so that was a fascinating thing to be a part of. You can actually see me in the back there. Let's see. So here's some photos. Kusala is quite a prominent Buddhist social media presence. And here I am with some of the other monks. I was also very, very, very greatly impressed with some of the Buddhist monks. There is in the spiritual life an emphasis, whether it's Christian or other religions, an emphasis on simplicity, and some of that can be tied in with minimal possessions. Now, we went to this one Buddhist monastery in Northern California, city of 10,000 Buddhas. And then nearby, there was another monastery that was basically, there was a place to gather for meditation. And then up in the woods, each of the monks had their own little hut, basically. I mean, it was just a small little wooden room. And I remember visiting, we would just go in and just take a quick look. Here's where the Buddhist monks live. And I commented, and this was probably, I would say, true. When I looked into their huts, I thought, I packed more in my backpack for this weekend than they have in their huts. As far as like, well, I've got a laptop, I've got a camera, I've got a few things. So now here actually, Hangshur is a Buddhist monk who studied at the same school that I graduated from. He graduated from the school sometime before I came there, but I also took a course with him on Buddhist-Christian dialogue. And don't get to see him very often now. I think he is now in Australia. So yeah, there is some about Buddhist-Christian dialogue. The point being that there is a Buddhist-Christian dialogue to begin with. Certainly a lot more that we could go into further detail. But with that, as I mentioned, the plan for next week, Thursday, I'll send out a Zoom option, but I will also be here in the classroom for anyone who wants to join in. So with that, thank you all and best wishes. Namaste.
After mom was waiting for class,
Okay.
I went down to my dorm. And I walked in the hallway and it smelled like burning wood. And so I had to go through this whole thing and call the public safety and everything. And this one girl was burning incense.
Okay.
You're not supposed to do it in the dorms, but I definitely understand for religious purposes. So I was like, wow.
Okay.
I hope she's not too scary. I might, I was just scared that it's fire or something.
Right.
But the fact that something on it's kind of strange, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good to know it wasn't any kind of actual fire or anything.
Being my work goes slowly today.
Okay.
I'm so sad this class is almost over, but I'm thankful.
Oh, yeah. Been great having you in this class. Let's see, you graduate this year or, okay.
I'll graduate in fall of 26 from my undergraduate, but I'm looking to get my master's here, so.
Okay.
Still seem to.
All right, yeah. Okay. All right, best wishes.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
And you as well.